Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this special program. Baker and Baker presents the music of Reena Esmail, and I'm Morihiko Nakara, music director of the South Carolina Philharmonic, and we are just so excited to be joined by Reena Esmail, who is joining us from Los Angeles, I believe, and as the museum is celebrating the end, really, of, I think today is the last day for the big Visions from India exhibit. And initially, during what we call now the before times, we were planning to have a big residency plan for Reena to present this kind of program you're about to hear in person at the museum, in the galleries, in the exhibit, and also be with us for our season opener, well, not season opener, but a January Masterworks concert with the Philharmonic, where we're going to play one of Reena's pieces and maybe have her work with composition students at the University of South Carolina and so on. And of course, as it is now, it's sort of in this virtual format for this recital. But Reena, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And, one of the really sad things that got canceled was this thing. It was going to be so great to be there in person, see all this amazing modern Indian art, and, get to meet all of you for the first time. But I'm really glad to be doing this remotely. So, yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And before we start the program, and the way we did it for this was there are several of our musicians who recorded these pieces, I think just before New Year's, in the galleries. So you'll see some of the artwork from the exhibit behind them. And then we also have two musicians who live far away. One is based in Boston, for instance, and so they recorded some of the unaccompanied pieces by Reena remotely. And so you will see those two who are not masked are the ones who were recording in the comfort of their own homes. So no worries there if anybody out there is worried about that. And I think before we go on, I want to make sure that we recognize our sponsors, the Baker and Baker Foundation. And also big thanks to Wilson Bain, who's produced this whole thing. So, and edited and mastered the recordings and so on. As well as during the recording process, I'd like to recognize Dave Elwine from the Jam Room Recording Studio, who stepped in to help out with the recording as well. And Wilson is sort of producing behind the scenes. And if you could, actually on the comment section, it's already there. So if you'd like to learn more about Reena, we have her website up. And so that's you can find out more about her biography, and we'll get into some of that during the program as well. And check out what we're presenting today is really just a fraction of this incredible body of work, compositions that Reena has produced over the last several years. And it's the whole website is set up so well in terms of having the sound files and the detailed program notes. So it is like going to an art museum and having a curated experience, basically. But Reena, were you born in LA, or did you grow up? You grew up in LA.
I grew up in LA. I was actually born in Chicago, but I've been living in LA since I was 3. And then I just left to go to school when I was 18, but then came back about 6-7 years ago now. And so I've lived in LA as an adult, and I grew up here, but I had a long period where I was away. So, yeah.
And Reena, you have your degree. You did your undergraduate studies at the Juilliard School, and that was in composition as well.
Yeah.
And then Reena received her master's degree as well as a doctorate degree from the Yale School of Music. And so she's been based in LA. She is currently the Los Angeles Master Chorale's Swan Family Artist in Residence from 2020 to 23. as well as the composer in residence with the Seattle Symphony.
Yeah, upcoming, and it was supposed to be this season, but of course everything got moved. So yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and her works have been commissioned by ensembles all around the country. A lot of chamber music, orchestral works, and of course a lot of vocal and choral works as well, which you won't be hearing any of those pieces here today. But I encourage everybody to really check out her website and get to know more about her and her music. So we will start the program with a piece that was one of the pieces that was recorded remotely by Sophie Wan, who is our senior assistant concertmaster, and it's called When the Violin. And I believe this is probably the most recent work that we are doing today.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Reena, how did this piece come about, and are there, what are sort of the origins of this particular piece that we're about to hear?
Yeah, this piece has a very interesting trajectory. It was initially supposed to be a cello obbligato in a piece for choir and cello. And so the piece starts like the way that this solo violin version starts. But then, the choir takes over and sings this poem by Hafiz that's called When the Violin. So the first stanza of it is, when the violin can forgive the past, it starts singing. And so it's this idea of, what does it mean to kind of crack open your soul and, forgive the past? It means, that you begin to sing again, you begin to kind of beauty emanates from that place of forgiveness. So it's interesting because it was only ever supposed to be that. But then during this pandemic time, my husband is a violinist, and he was, this a speaker who was giving a lecture for Americans for the Arts, and he wanted to talk about forgiveness. So he said, hey, do you think you can write me a version of it that's supposed to be, just a piece by itself? And so that's where this version actually emerged, which is, starts the same way, but actually has a really different trajectory.
I see. This is great. And let's see, I also realized that I had it mislabeled. I'm sorry. This is the one done in person. Sorry.
Oh.
This is what happens sometimes. Okay. So sorry about that. This is not Sophie Wan. This is actually Merely Taylor Kinosian, who is our concertmaster. And so this was recorded in the gallery. So here's When the Violin by Reena Esmail, performed by Merely Taylor Kinosian. So that was When the
Wow.
Violin, performed by Marilee Taylor Kinosian, our concertmaster. And looking at the comment thread here, there was a comment. I thought we will bring this out. Bob Evans, who is actually one of our bassoonists in the orchestra, who is joining us. He says the drones and double stops sound awesome in that space. And the drones, I noticed that because we are doing the string orchestra piece next Saturday, which will be also streamed as well, and we're doing Tim Murty
Yeah.
earpiece, and in the slow section of that, I noticed this use of drone like ideas, and not having any background in Indian music or Hindustani music. I was wondering if that is part of sort of the signature idea that you might hear in Indian
Yeah.
music.
I mean, I think it's really interesting because, in Western music, we have kind of a harmonic underpinning. So, you're on the one chord, people are playing things, but it's kind of implied what the harmony is as you move along. With Indian music, you're always in relationship to a drone that is omnipresent and just always there. But it's also not a static thing. Like the note might be static, but you're playing a bunch of different strings that are kind of resonating on this big instrument that looks like a sitar, but it's kind of held upright. It's called a tanpura. And so you're always kind of getting this thing that's going in and out and is sometimes high and sometimes low and sometimes the fifth and sometimes, the tonic. And so I try to emulate that in my music. And so in this case, I mean, it was nice to have just that open D string on the violin and you're playing both over it and under it, and yet it's still kind of always there. You're always holding it. So yeah, that's it's certainly an interesting challenge every time I have to orchestrate the drone.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And speaking of this, and speaking of Tim Murty, our next piece has some connection with the piece that the orchestra will be playing, and this is taken from your string quartet.
Yeah.
And but so I think before we play that, it would be amiss to not talk about how sort of this whole idea of collaboration came together, and that was really it plays into this our next piece and the whole program as well. So what happened was it was probably a year and a half ago, 2 summers ago. I happened to be at the museum, Columbia Museum of Art, for one of the exhibit openings, and there I got into a conversation with Glenna Barlow, who's one of the staff members at the museum, and I like to always kind of have some information about what future exhibits are coming, so that maybe there are a lot of times where we can kind of do cross programming and pick some music during our season that sort of complements some of these big exhibits or artists who might be featured. And they told me about this Visions of India exhibit coming up, and at that point I think was really right about the time where I got to know your music through the website and so on. And I think it's because I've worked a lot with Josh Roman, a cellist,
Right.
and I think he's done a lot of your music as well. So I came across. I was aware of. I knew about Reena's work, and I was in love with the style and the sound. I thought would be fantastic for us and our audiences. And so I mentioned this to Glenna, and Glenna's so it's basically we were in India together.
Yeah.
On the Fulbright. So that was that was after. So when you started composing, were already incorporating some of the traditional Indian musical elements, or how? I mean, was the year that you spent in India on Fulbright? I mean, how in a nutshell, how did that affect you in terms of as a composer?
I mean, that was a seminal year in my life because I think, for me, and especially when you are from a tradition that's not necessarily known within the Western musical tradition. I mean, if I was Italian or something, it would be completely different. But because I'm Indian, it always felt a little bit like a pull for me, where I wanted to be as good a composer as I could be. But then I didn't grow up with Indian music. My parents. My mom is from a part of India where it was colonized by Portugal. So she studied Western classical music as a kid. So, I'd always gone into Western classical music. And when you're young, you just feel like it's so hard to even be able to play the piano correctly or just write some notes on a piece of paper that it's so hard then to even learn another tradition. So basically, until I was about 25, 26 years old, I composed stuff that was really not influenced by Indian music, but I was very aware that I was from a culture that I wasn't necessarily able to express in my music. So really the year before my Fulbright, 2010, we had a person come from New Delhi to Yale, where I was doing my master's at the time, and started to teach us a little bit of Indian music. And that was the first moment I felt like I can get in here. I can really learn, I can understand my own culture, and I can understand it deeply enough to be able to incorporate it. But so that's when I applied for a Fulbright and went to India. And that year changed my life because, it's one thing to be studying a kind of music at a Western university. It's a totally other thing to be in the culture and you're hearing the same sounds, but contextualized in the culture from which they grew. And it's even another thing to be someone who looks like and is from that culture, able to take in your own culture as, in a way, both an insider and an outsider. So that year truly changed my entire life and the direction of my career. And it was amazing because, again, we used to live in Delhi. That was where I did my Fulbright. And so it was one of the really big hubs that a lot of the other Fulbrighters would come through. So, Glenna certainly came and spent some time with us, and many other Fulbrighters did too. So it was a way to really learn and cross-pollinate and just process the experience together. So, yeah.
Great. So our next piece it's sort of a excerpt, really, a movement of your string quartet. And so I'm assuming, I think this piece was it shortly after your
yes.
year? Or?
Yeah, exactly. I came back, and then the next summer, I started I wrote this piece for a string quartet. And this is it's actually really funny, especially since you're also performing Teen Murti.
Right.
So the thing goes, I wrote the string quartet, and then River Oaks Chamber Orchestra asked me to make it for a string orchestra. And I mean, you can call a string quartet, string quartet, but you can't call a piece for string orchestra string orchestra.
Right.
So I had to make a title for it. So that title, which is the last three movements of the piece, is called Teen Murti. And then Josh Roman, who I'm now realizing that you know, he asked for a version of the string orchestra piece, but for string quartet and cello.
Oh, yeah.
So that version is called Theme Words. It's so crazy how these things all flow into one another. But yeah,
Right.
So this is the second movement of my string quartet, I think.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything else about this particular what we're about to hear that the listeners should know sort of before we hear it? Or
well, I mean, first of all, congratulations to the players who played this, because you picked the hardest movement to play. I mean, I'm very, very impressed that you chose to do that in such a short time. But I can't wait to hear it. It's also like a really exciting movement, so I'm glad. The thing about each of the movements of the string quartet is they're all in different Indian ragas. And what I've been trying to do in my music is pick ragas. So a raga, for those of you who might not know, is it's a little bit equivalent to a scale, but it also has just a lot more in it. So I call it a scale with personality. It has different kind of ways of navigating it. So I always try to pick rags that have some way of processing them through the eyes of Western music. And in this case, because the rag has no fifth in it, you're always feeling that when you come back to the tonic note, to Western ears, it feels like you're coming back to the five. So it feels like the phrases are never quite over, even though to Indian ear, it would feel like the phrases were all ending on one. In this case, and if any of you are Western musicians, you'll feel that like, is it over? Is it not? So that's his rag maltance, and that's what this piece is in.
Great. And so here's the performance by Marilee Taylor-Kinosian and Ashley Horvath on violin, Scott Garrett on viola, and Dusan Vukatovich on cello.
Wow, I love it.
So that was the and that I kind of picked that one because that also serves as a preview to our the string orchestra for the Team Murti too for next weekend as well. So those four players already know the music, so that's
Right? Yeah. Yeah, it's one of
uh,
those things where when you listen to it, it sounds like it's so just groovy and whatever, but it's really hard to get that stuff together. So it was awesome. Yeah.
I could tell you that in my preparation for next weekend, I actually devised a new way of marking the score. Because I
Wow.
don't usually, nowadays I don't really need to mark as much. But in this one, I had to I finally came up with a new way of marking it, so it doesn't.
Oh my God.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't. So because if you try to, if you kind of, the dangerous part is when you start to feel the groove, but then you assume wrong. So you're like a 16th note short in a measure or something. It's like, oh no, that's a 13/16 bar. What am I doing?
Right.
Or something like that. So those. So this I'm really looking forward to doing that. Doing
Yeah.
this, doing Team Murti as well. Yeah, merely said, haha, yes, we know, right?
Right, exactly.
I
Oh my,
am too
yeah.
predictable. Anyway, so now we come to and we now come to a piece. It's a duet. And is it pronounced Nadia or
Nadia, yeah.
Nadia? And
Yeah.
that means river, right?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think there are various combinations of instruments that we can use, but we're doing the violin and bassoon duet version.
Mhm.
And what I really find, and this is also true, like in the opening of the scherzo, the quartet movement we just heard, uh, and applies to Nadia as well, is that the whole idea, we often think of music making as a form of communication with one another. I feel like in your music, that element and the whole sort of the as a form of communication and as a almost having this kind of spiritual gathering, sort of having a communion almost type of aspect is really, I feel like it comes to the forefront. And I think this piece really, this piece for two players is sort of, it's a great example of that, I think. And what was interesting was also, Reena, what you on your website, uh, for the instruction to the performers, essentially say, yeah, I mean, depending on, it's about trusting each other, the two performers sort of trusting each other and sort of communicating without words, and the duration of this performance could, range from any, one,
Yeah.
these two people might take 11 minutes to perform this piece, and these two people might take 8 minutes to
Right.
perform the piece. So it's such a, I feel like that's such a a wonderful idea that, yeah, it just sort of, things just kind of develop and unfold and fall back in on their own time, depending
Yeah.
on how you're reacting to each other. And so I thought that was fantastic. But anything else we should know about
Yeah,
this
I mean,
piece?
yeah, just to continue on with that idea. I mean, I think one of the things that always struck me when I was growing up about, playing in large Western classical ensembles. I mean, of course, the best ensembles and especially the best chamber ensembles, even though you're reading off the page, you're still really kind of communicating with one another. But if you write music that's kind of in the same time signature and has a certain amount of rest, it's possible to kind of check out and check back in if you just count the right amount of measures. And I really wanted to see, okay, what is the opposite of that? Where literally you cannot even play the piece unless you truly understand the other person's part. And so that's what Nadia was. It was supposed to be the flute and cello version was the initial version, and it was commissioned by two players who knew each other really well. And I wanted to kind of, test that boundary, like how much are you willing to trust one another? And it literally feels like you've got to dive into the other person's phrase and just kind of hope they catch you. You know, it really feels like that. But the better you know one another, the more you're able to communicate and trust one another, the more the piece can kind of develop. And it's also really interesting because I've seen now a number of people do this piece many times over a series of years and see how their communication has changed with multiple passes of the piece. So to me, it's like so much of my music is almost, it teaches me as much about the performers as maybe the performers learn about me through my music. And I like to see, you know, where we have shared values, where they can take something and run with it in a way I could never have imagined. So to me, every performance in Nadia is so different from one another that I'm very excited to see what this one is.
Yeah, so here is Nadia, performed by Ashley Horvath on violin and Patrick Herring on bassoon.
Wow, that was amazing.
So that was a piece called Nadia by Reena and performed by Ashley Horvat on the violin and Patrick Herring on the bassoon. And yeah, so it's such a, it just seems so timeless. This,
Yeah, I mean, what was so interesting, actually, we were just talking about, trusting one another. And I actually find that this is the first performance I've heard where trusting one another actually means giving each other more space. Like, there was no hurry. They were both just so in their element. And sometimes trusting one another means kind of, diving into one another. Sometimes it means kind of pulling back. And that was just, again, every performance is so different and tells me so much about, who the musicians are, what their values are, what they care about. And that was just incredible. Both of you, really amazing work.
Now we come to a piece for unaccompanied viola, solo viola, and it's called "Take What You Need." And I think this was a piece that originated as a choral work, right?
Yeah, that's kind of a theme with my work. All of it kind of morphs from one thing into another. Yeah.
But I think, and this piece, and this, I think it would be a perfect time to talk about things like Urban Voices Project, and some of your projects that you're having involved with, over the past several years that have to do with community engagement and making sure that everybody has access to music and music making. So if you like to spend a few minutes talking about how this piece came about and sort of talk about the Urban Voices Project and some of the other things that you're involved in now. I think that would be, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my values has always been, okay, so I'm trying to think about kind of the chain of how things work, right? As composers, we often take things in and we metabolize them through our music and we respond to them. But then the question is the issue we're taking in that we're trying to figure out, is our resolution to that actually going back to help the situation itself, or is it just kind of us doing our thing? And both are really valuable, but to me, it was very important that, that cycle be completed. And so I worked for many years. I was a composer in residence at Street Symphony, which is a LA-based organization that serves homeless and incarcerated people. And one of the things that I really loved, honestly, when you go to shelters and you go to jails and prisons, some of the most engaged audiences I've ever seen are in those places, because they don't necessarily have these agreements of we have to sit in seats, we have to be quiet, we're in the dark. They're just there to hear music and really engage and enjoy. And so I worked with this choir called Urban Voices Project, as you mentioned. Many of them are either currently or were very recently homeless. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to see them in the pandemic. I haven't actually spent time with them in almost a year now. But when I went in to write this piece for them, I didn't want to write a piece about them or about their situation. I wanted to write a piece that was really for them and with them and by them as well. And so when I really looked into, really spent time with them and asked them, what do you want this piece to be? The things that kind of came up were, number one, that they wanted their voice to be heard. They wanted a place to tell their story. And number two, they wanted a place that was kind of warm and safe and really allowing the community to come together. And so this piece, again, started out as a 20-minute choral work where the thing that you'll hear is actually the chorus. And then there would be these little interludes where people could get up and tell their stories, and the interludes would be looped in a way that they would be able to know when it was over, but they could spend as long as they wanted. So it allowed them to really say what they wanted to say. So, if you do any Google search of this, you'll find varying instrumentations, varying lengths. I wanted it to be something that was portable, that you could take in to prisons, or, that you didn't need a piano or big performing forces to perform it. And so it's interesting because, the community has certainly made it their own, and it's very rarely performed in concert halls. It's mostly performed in places that are, I've heard it being performed at funerals, or being performed in support groups, or being performed in religious places, and places just where people want community and want to gather, and they're all important. There's not like an audience and performers. So this version is kind of the most pared down version. And I used to do it again. My now husband is the person, I met him through Street Symphony. And we used to perform this together, where he would played the version you're about to hear, but on violin, and I would speak these words over it. And let me just say the words for you. So it goes: take a moment, take a breath, take time, take care, take hope, take heart, take a stand, or take a step. Oh my gosh, take a stand, take courage, take charge. Take a moment, take a breath, take what you need. I'm missing a few of them in there. Other people are now better at it than I am. But in any case, it's this idea of, take the thing that you need from your life, take whatever you need. And it's usually done in call and response. So I would sing the first phrase and the audience would sing it back to me. And when you do these things in second person, again, the solutions are so simple when you're asking the right questions. But when you sing it in second person back and forth, it's this feeling that you're really building a dialogue with someone, and maybe that's dialogue with the person sitting next to you in the audience. Maybe it's dialogue between the performers and the audience. And it's just amazing that I could never predict what would happen in the room and the love that you would just feel in the room when people are saying things to one another, as opposed to just, hoping that they'll get some experience just for themselves. So that's the basis of this piece. And what you'll hear is just, Eve playing the music behind it. But again, I encourage you all to check that out. Check out Street Symphony and Urban Voices Project and these many beautiful things.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So here's the performance of Take What You Need in a version for solo viola, and it's performed by Eve Tan, who is our principal violist.
Oh, that's great.
Beautiful, yeah. So that was Take What You Need. And we now come to a piece this is the, everything else on this program was composed by Reena. This next piece is a transcription or transcription, arrangement,
kind of arrangement,
of a piece by another composer, and this is also written for string quartet. And I think the whole concept of this series, and it was done for the Kronos quartet. If you go to the Kronos quartet's website, and of course Kronos quartet have been the vanguard of new music and world music, and the whole idea of creativity and commissioning works from composers from all around the world, from different backgrounds and so on. And they have a new project called, is it 50 for the Future, I believe, is the name of their project. And what's great about this is it's a great resource not only for well, it's a great resource for music lovers and people who want to get to know different composers and so on as well. But it's also a great resource for musicians who might be in high school or college or so on, maybe playing in a string quartet, learning the standard repertoire, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven quartets, and so on. But also gives them an opportunity to sort of broaden their horizons and get to know these amazing body of works that are being written for the Kronos quartet, but that is accessible to those players, and also a lot of times incorporating either some kind of a technological element. So maybe there might be a recorded sound that they will play along with, and so on. And so, Rita, can we talk a little bit about this this arrangement that you did for this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so great to work with Kronos. I'm currently in the process of working with them on my fourth project, and this one I think was the second one that I did for them. So it's basically this very famous and well-known Indian violinist named Kala Ramnath, and so she is just a luminary in her field, and obviously Kronos is a luminary in our field, and basically she wrote this piece for violin, and what that means in an Indian setting is that you kind of come up with it and then you record it, and that's the piece, because notation is a very different thing in Indian classical music. So because that kind of gap in translation exists, someone like me who understands both cultures kind of gets called in to do that work of bridging this idea of how do you take one instrument, make it into four instruments, how do you even notate stuff, like how does that all work? And what's interesting is that, when I'm composing music, I'm obviously completely in control of the environment and what's happening, but I was really thinking, what does this arrangement translation thing feel like? And to me, it almost feels like, I'm sure there are people who translate between like heads of countries, where clearly these people are, at the tops of what they do. They have really brilliant and wonderful ideas that are based in their own culture and in their own country. And then someone has to come in and be like, hey, this is where your values align. Here's where they don't. This is what, and of course, you have so much respect for both sides, and both sides are right. It's just a matter of figuring out where those places align with one another. So for me, I learned so much about the way that, you play. She's playing the same instrument. She's playing a violin that's the same instrument that Kronos would play, but that she's playing it in such a different way. And how do I translate that over in a way that makes sense? So it was such a great project, and we're still working on a number of other projects with other Indian artists. So yeah, this is Amrit.
Yes, and there's a recorded element to go along with this piece as well, right?
Yes, it can be at times. I think this is the one, I'm getting them mixed up, but this is the one with the recorded tabla, where there's a rhythm track that's recorded.
Right.
It's interesting because in other arrangements I've done, we've had the cello. The cellist of Kronos has figured out how to make their cello into a rhythm instrument with a combination of miking and with kind of glisses and then hitting the board, and it sounds incredible. So yeah, we try all kinds of new things, but this one does come with a rhythm track that you can work with. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's listen to that.
That was wonderful. Well,
That's
I was saying before the show that this is the first time I've ever heard a group besides Kronos play the piece. Many have, but I've never heard them, and it's so great to feel like that. Even without me there, or without whatever, the resources hold up well enough that it was just such a authentic and beautiful performance, even without like me being involved in the process. It feels really nice. So thank you, everyone.
that's an interesting one too, because the way this particular performance worked was that, so through the Kronos's website, we can download the sheet music, score,
Right.
and all of these things with the notes, and it's very helpful, like guide to some of the techniques or ideas and so on. And also then for the tabla sound and the drone you hear, that's a separate set of sound files that you can also just download. And so that's how we made that happen. And and I wasn't sure, with the recording in the galleries, with the system playing the recorded track for everybody else. I wasn't quite sure how that was all going to work out, but it turned out really beautifully. So
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Wow, nice.
and now we get to this is a piece for solo cello, and I believe there are two versions of this piece, and I think this is the first version from I think 2005. It's a piece called Perhaps. And I think this was originally, or it was intended as to accompany a film, right?
Yeah,
That's how.
yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, it's interesting because this is a deep track. I mean, I wrote this when I was a senior undergrad at Juilliard, and it's just interesting because I had a friend who actually is still one of my dearest friends. We met in high school, and she has basically done every art form besides music. Like, she's been a dancer, she's been a filmmaker, a author, she's writing a novel right now, and she's just a very, very artistic and like broad thinking person. So at the time, she was sitting on my couch. She was going to NYU for film school, and I was going to Juilliard for composition. And, she was sitting on my couch reading Derrida while I was composing. And she came up with this thing, which I wish that I could describe it, but I cannot even pretend that I understand Derrida. But it was something about perhaps being both like a verb and an adjective. And so she was just telling me about it while I was composing. And I thought, okay, why don't I write a piece about this and you make a film about this, and let's make this thing happen. And I think, one of the things to say about it is that we were both very much at the beginning of our creative process. We were still trying to figure out the world. And I'm sure, for any of you who are listening, who are, young people, who are high schoolers or college age students, you get that feeling where that something is still out of reach for you, but that that if you just work for the next couple decades, you might get there. That was what this piece, I think, was for both of us. And it's one of the many things we've done over the years, but we're still asking questions with one another. I mean, even in this pandemic, we've had a call every Monday just to kind of discuss artistic process. And that's been really helpful to see someone outside of music grapple with these artistic concepts. So this is our first collaboration.
Great. So here's a performance of Perhaps, and it's performed by Dusan Vukailovich on the cello.
Wow, it's beautiful.
So, the original idea was if we could do this in person, we would have had the film
Right.
playing, in the background as well. But it's such a beautiful piece of music to just enjoy without the film as well. So glad we could do that. Before the final piece on the program. And of course, Rita, I would love for you to talk a little bit about this piece as well. Just a reminder that if you haven't had a chance to catch this exhibit, Visions from India, today is the last day, I believe, and the museum is open till 5. So if you're in Colombia, grab your face mask, run out the door, and go check it out. And also, thanks to all of the artists. And I know if you follow the chat thread through the comments, where the paintings where the musicians were placed in front of during the recording process, you see what those paintings were. And thanks to those artists for their generosity and having their artworks being part of this musical performance. As well.
I mean, I also wanted to say that was one of the reasons why I was so sad not to be able to be with all of you, because, it's very rare. I mean, most of the time when my music gets put alongside something, it's almost always with something from the Western canon. And when Glenna first talked to me about this exhibit and we were first discussing it, I thought, wow, how nice to have my music. I'm kind of trying to blend modern culture with Indian and Western classical music. How wonderful to be able to interact with the art version of that. These are people who are kind of my peers and who are asking the same questions about what does it mean to be an Indian artist in a modern society. And so as I've been watching each of the paintings in the background, it's been contextualizing my work in a really different way. And gosh, I so hope that I get to meet some of these artists someday. I hope I get to see more of their work. And I'm so sad that I didn't get to spend time in the gallery, but I really hope some of you can. And hopefully we'll all connect at some point in the world.
Exactly. So as I mentioned, we now come to our final piece on this program, and it's also a piece written for unaccompanied violin, and this one is performed by Sophie Wan, who recorded it in Boston. Could you tell us a little bit about this piece? Darshan, is it?
Yeah, Darshan. So the word darshan has actually kind of a religious connotation in Indian in Indian culture, which means when you go and see a god. Sometimes you see an idol of a god. It's like basically visiting and paying your respects to a god is called darshan. But darshan is basically kind of the unveiling of the divine, right? And so to me, it felt very personal, and this piece is actually a 5-movement piece that will be written over the next 5 years. So actually, I'm just finishing up the second movement, maybe tomorrow. It was supposed to be done at the end of the year, but you know how composers are. We always just push things a little further. So initially I started writing this piece almost 4 years ago now, and it just started evolving. And I started writing it with a violinist who at that point was my friend and now is my husband. And so we began to kind of see things in one another, and we began to see just new possibilities. But we also did in terms of the violin itself, because again, the thing I was talking about trust before, when you trust a performer and when you trust them in the compositional process and when they trust you, it's not just like you write the piece, you hand it over to them, they play the piece at the end. It's like you're kind of composing it and you're kind of performing it together, and those lines are much more blurred. And so you can go so much further when you're working with someone who knows their craft as well as you know your craft. So, I mean, of course, I love, and one of the amazing things of this pandemic has been being able to collaborate with different single performers who normally would be touring or playing in orchestras, or they would be so busy and unable to take that time to really collaborate. So I have a number of kind of solo works that have been going that I never expected to be able to write during this time. But so this is one movement of Darshan, and I guess if I say anything it's about maybe the different kinds of grief. And so, you have this grief that's very internal, this grief that feels like, oh, it's so external and you're just, trying to express it outwardly. You have this grief that's kind of reaching for something and not quite being able to feel it or get there. So that's what this piece was about.
Great. So let's listen to Darshan, performed by Sophie Wan. So that
Wow,
was
that was
Darshan
amazing.
performed by Sophie Wan, and that this concludes the official part of the program. But if any of you listening and watching out there, if you any of you have questions for Reena, and sorry, I should have mentioned this before the piece, but if you have any questions for Reena, you could just type it up in your comment section, and we will do that as the time allows here. And I would also like to again thank the Baker and Baker Foundation for making this program possible, and also, of course, to all of the musicians who took part in this journey to put together this program. So congratulations, and my deepest thanks to the musicians of the South Carolina Philharmonic, Mary Taylor Kinosian, Ashley Horvat, Scott Garrett, Dusan Vukailovich, Patrick Herring, Eve Tan, and Sophie Wan. So thanks to all of you for also tuning in. And let's see. Oh, first question is here. Let's see. Wilson can maybe flash this one up. So, have you ever written anything that you hated?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes, and it is buried so far deeply that you will never be able to find it. Yeah, it's interesting. Over the years, I've written things. I've written some things that I've just hated while I was writing them, and they never kind of saw the light of day. But then I've also written things where I almost feel like there's kind of a 2-year cycle and a 10-year cycle. So sometimes you write things, and then after 2 years, you're like, oh my God, what was that? I have to pull that off. That's terrible. After 10 years, you're like, actually, that wasn't that bad. Like, I kind of think it's okay. So there are some that I've kind of pulled out and put back in. But yeah, I definitely have a bass trombone piece that's buried very deeply in the ether, a few songs. Yeah. There are some clunkers for sure.
I mean, the bass trombone piece. I mean, bass trombone players are, thirsty for like solo piece, right?
They will be so sorry they asked if they ever encounter that piece.
Is that so? It's how much of that when you're writing a new piece, is it often that what's is it the do you get the musical ideas first, or is it driven more from like your previous relationships, friendships, and working friendships with those particular performers? Does that become sort of an inspiration for you as well?
It's so interesting because I mean it's changed over the years, and these days I mean I'm very lucky that a lot of people will get in touch with me and say, hey, I'd love for you to write me a piece. And sometimes they're ensembles, sometimes they're individuals, and this thing happened a couple years ago that kind of reset my mind for how I start writing a piece, and it was that a choir conductor contacted me, and she needed a piece very quickly, like more quickly than I would reasonably do. So I basically got on the phone to tell her no, and when she started talking, I literally started hearing the piece while she was talking. And I thought, oh, if I just write down what I'm hearing, like this is fine. I can totally do this. And so then I kind of thought to myself, am I hearing the piece as I'm having these initial discussions with people? And if I am, then I take the commission, even if I end up writing something totally different. But I find that often musicians have a very inspiring quality to them that I can immediately tell whether there's resonance between us or not. And if there is, it usually just creates a whole world where we can trust each other and then work together. But certainly, yeah, I do like to know that I have at least one workable idea right away before I say yes to a piece of music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Merely our concertmaster. Can you zoom to a rehearsal next week, maybe? Can you zoom to a rehearsal next week, maybe? I mean, sorry, I was.
The person who controls my schedule is my assistant, and she, God bless her, has turned into a complete scheduling, goddess in this pandemic. Because one of the crazy things about this time is that because place is no longer a thing, I am working in all cities at all times, and it's like one moment I'll be on the East Coast, the next moment I'll be like in India, and it's amazing and also so disconcerting. But we'll check on that for you.
Yeah, I'll send Melanie the schedule, so we can work on that. Let's see, any other questions from maybe
while
maybe
we're
everybody
waiting,
just ran out of their homes to catch the end of the exhibit,
exactly.
at the
Well, I will say
museum.
as we wrap up, just while I was listening to these musicians play, most of them have done this in one take, without really being able to, have played it a lot of times for a lot of people. And just, it's amazing what each of these musicians were able to do. You know, they're all operating in a very different reality than the reality that they were trained for. And it's just amazing to see how much beauty can be generated even in these weird isolated spaces. So, I mean, hats off in the best of times, but especially hats off in this time for creating these incredibly inspiring performances.
Well, thank you, and I think they all really embrace the challenge, and just like Marilee was saying earlier as well in the chat line, they all really enjoy learning your piece and kind of diving into it. So yes, I think that was a big part of it as well. So thank you. And let's see, there's one question. Let's see. Bob Evans has a question. How much do you think the natural speech patterns of Hindi or its dialects influence the tabla rhythms?
Oh, incredibly. I mean, I think maybe even, I'm not sure if this is true, but probably even more than in Western music. Because actually the tabla has this, when you play the strokes on the tabla, they're actually called bols. And bol means like to speak, like a word or something. And so, but when you start playing the tabla, you don't just, bang on the drum. You start by actually saying things. So you might say something like, and then whatever that sounds like on the tabla. So it's almost like the tabla is speaking. And so there are so many different styles of Indian music, not even music for percussion instruments, but music even for vocalists and other melodic instrumentalists that are completely influenced by Indian speech. And that's just the rhythm element. I mean, there's also, I think, so much of the way your voice changes when you speak Hindi. Like if you were to hear a recording of me speaking Hindi versus speaking English, you wouldn't be able to tell that I was the same person because the tonality of my voice changes. And I think it's the same difference in tonality of music, where Indian music is a little bit more pointed, a little bit more nasal, a little bit more forward in your face, and that's the same with the language. So there's a really, really deep connection. I've actually written an article about it for New Music Box a couple of years ago. So yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll check that out. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, I think yeah. So thank you so much, Reena, for joining us. And again, it was such a pleasure to for us to put this program together. And
thank you, everyone. Yeah.
So thank you so much, and thank you all of you for joining us this afternoon. And hope everybody stays safe, and hope to see everybody in person sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves. And thanks again to the staff at the Columbia Museum of Art for all of the work that they've done, and to our musicians. So take care, everybody.
All right. Take care, everyone.